The gravel crunched under my truck's tires as I pulled into the driveway I hadn't seen in 3 years. Dad's ranch house looked smaller somehow, the paint more weathered, the porch sagging just a little more than I remembered. I sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the place where I'd grown up learning to rope cattle and mend fences. My name's Jake Morrison, and I was 42 years old when everything I thought I knew about family got turned upside down. I'd been working oil rigs in North Dakota, sending money home when I could, calling every few months. Dad and I hadn't exactly parted on good terms when I left. He wanted me to stay and work the ranch. I wanted something different, something that was mine. The funeral had been yesterday. Small affair, just like Dad would have wanted. My sister Sarah flew in from Seattle, looking every inch the successful lawyer in her black suit and designer shoes. We barely spoke, just nodded at each other across the grave. She'd left for college 25 years ago and never looked back, visiting maybe twice since then. Now here I was, back for the will reading, wondering if Dad had finally forgiven me for leaving. The lawyer had been cryptic on the phone, just saying my presence was required. I figured Dad would split things between Sarah and me, maybe give me the smaller north pasture where I used to practice roping. I climbed out of the truck, boots hitting familiar ground. The wind carried the scent of hay and cattle, memories flooding back of summer mornings helping Dad move the herd. Whatever happened in that lawyer's office, this place would always be home. Or so I thought. The law office in town hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same dusty main street, same faded storefronts, same feeling that time moved differently here than in the outside world. I pushed through the glass door, bell chiming overhead, and found Sarah already seated in the waiting area, scrolling through her phone. "Jake?" she said, barely looking up. Her voice carried that polished tone she'd developed somewhere along the way, all traces of our rural upbringing carefully scrubbed away. "Sarah?" I took the chair across from her, noting how she'd positioned herself near the window, probably calculating how quickly she could escape back to her real life. "Mr." Hendricks emerged from his office, the same lawyer who'd handled Dad's affairs for 30 years. His hair had gone completely gray, but his handshake was still firm. "Jake, good to see you, son. Sorry about your father." We followed him into his office, wood-paneled walls lined with law books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. Family photos cluttered his desk, grandchildren I'd never met. He settled behind his desk, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses as he opened a manila folder. "Your father was very specific about his wishes," Hendricks began, his tone careful, measured. He spent considerable time updating his will over the past year. Sarah leaned forward slightly, the first sign of real interest she'd shown. I found myself holding my breath, thinking about the ranch, about Dad's legacy, about whether he'd found a way to forgive me for all those years away. "The Morrison Ranch, all 8,000 acres, along with the house, outbuildings, and livestock," Hendricks continued, "goes entirely to Sarah Morrison." The words hit me like a physical blow. Entirely. Not half, not a portion. Everything. I stared at Hendricks, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" He cleared his throat, glancing between Sarah and me. "The ranch goes to your sister. All of it." Sarah's expression hadn't changed, but I caught something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe even guilt. She'd expected this about as much as I had. "There's more," Hendricks continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Your father left this letter to be read aloud." My hands were shaking as he unfolded the paper. Dad's handwriting, shaky but determined, filled the page. "To my children," Hendricks read, "Sarah, you've built a life I'm proud of. You took your education and made something of yourself in the world. The ranch is yours now, to do with as you see fit." I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. "Jake," the letter continued, "you walked away from this place when it needed you most. You chose oil fields over family land, money over legacy. A man who abandons his responsibilities doesn't deserve to inherit them. The silence in the room was deafening. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past, normal life continuing while mine fell apart. However, Hendricks continued reading. I'm leaving you the old Chevy and $5,000. Enough to get you started somewhere else. $5,000. For 20 years of summers spent fixing fence, winters feeding cattle in sub-zero temperatures, for being the son who stayed until I couldn't anymore. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet. Jake, I had no idea. Congratulations, I managed, standing up. My legs felt unsteady. You got what you never wanted, and I lost what I never stopped loving. I walked out before anyone could say another word. I drove aimlessly through the county roads, past neighbors' farms and fields I'd known since childhood. The Hendersons' place, where I'd helped with harvest every fall. The old Miller Ranch sold to developers 5 years back, now sprouting cookie-cutter houses like weeds. My phone buzzed. Sarah. I let it go to voicemail. The truck seemed to find its own way to Willow Creek, the spot where Dad first taught me to fish when I was 7. I parked and walked down to the water, boots sliding on the muddy bank. The creek was lower than I remembered, drought taking its toll like it did on everything else around here. I sat on the fallen log where Dad and I used to clean our catch, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 25 years Sarah had been gone. 25 years of Christmas cards and brief phone calls, of missing Dad's birthday, of building a life that had nothing to do with this place. But she was the successful one, the one with the law degree and the corner office and the life Dad could brag about to his coffee shop friends. I was just Jake, the son who'd gotten restless and left when things got hard. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from 3 days ago, one I'd somehow missed in the chaos of the funeral. Dad's voice, weak but determined. Jake, son, I know we haven't talked much lately. There's things I need to say, things about the will. Call me back. I stared at the phone, that hollow feeling in my chest growing deeper. He'd tried to reach me. Whatever he'd wanted to say, whatever explanation or warning he'd planned to give, I'd missed it. Just like I'd missed so many other things by staying away. The creek gurgled past, indifferent to my pain. I drove back to town as the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this place as a kid. The motel on the edge of town looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. Faded sign, cracked parking lot, the kind of place that survived on traveling salesmen and people with nowhere else to go. I was officially one of the latter now. The desk clerk, a woman about my age with tired eyes, handed me a key to room 12. You're Tom Morrison's boy, aren't you? Sorry for your loss. Your daddy was a good man. Thank you, I managed, though the words felt like sandpaper in my throat. Room 12 smelled like old cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. 7 missed calls from Sarah. 3 voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Instead, I called my foreman in North Dakota. Hey, Chuck, it's Jake. Yeah, the funeral was today. Listen, I'm going to need more time than I thought. Take all the time you need, brother. Family's family. If only it were that simple. I hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the main street where I'd learned to drive, where I'd had my first job at Peterson's Hardware, where I'd kissed Mary Ellen Parker behind the diner when we were 16. This was supposed to be home. This was supposed to be where I belonged, where 3 generations of Morrison men had worked the land and built something lasting. Instead, I was a stranger in a motel room, cut off from the only legacy I'd ever wanted. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. We need to talk. I'm at the ranch. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Nothing to talk about. It's your ranch now. But even as I sent it, I knew I was lying. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face the last time we'd argued, 3 years ago in the kitchen of the ranch house. He'd wanted me to come back permanently, said the ranch needed young blood. I'd told him I had my own life to live, my own path to follow. "This land has been in our family for 70 years, he'd said, voice rising. "Your grandfather built this place from nothing. And I'm supposed to sacrifice my life to keep it going?" I'd shot back. Sarah got to leave. She got to become something. Sarah's different. Those 2 words had cut deeper than any insult. Sarah's different. Translation: Sarah was worth more than the ranch. I was only worth what I could do for it. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and drove out to the ranch. The house was dark except for one light in the kitchen window. Sarah's rental car sat in the driveway, looking as out of place as she probably felt. I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. She looked up when I walked in, her professional composure cracked around the edges. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I poured myself coffee from the pot she'd made, using the same chipped mug I'd favored as a teenager. "Funny how this place gets into your head." "Jake, about the will." "Don't." I sat across from her, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast before school, where Dad had taught us to play poker, where we'd planned our escapes from this small-town life. "You won. Fair and square." "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I swear to you, I had no idea he was going to cut you out completely." "Would it have mattered if you did?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "I don't know." "You want to know something?" Sarah said, breaking the silence. "I never wanted to leave." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the funeral. Without her lawyer armor, she looked tired, older than her 39 years. "That's hard to believe. You couldn't wait to get out of here." "I was 18 and scared," she said. "Scared of ending up like Mom, married young, dreams buried under laundry and cattle prices and never seeing anything beyond the county line." Our mother had died when Sarah was 15, cancer taking her quick and brutal. Dad had never been the same after that, throwing himself into the ranch work like it could fill the hole she'd left behind. "So you ran to Seattle and never looked back?" "I looked back every day," she said, voice breaking slightly. "Do you know how many times I picked up the phone to call Dad? How many times I almost bought a plane ticket home?" "Then why didn't you?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I was afraid he'd ask me to stay, and I was afraid I'd say yes and hate myself for it." I thought about my own reasons for leaving. The restlessness that had driven me to the oil fields, the need to prove I could make it on my own. Maybe we weren't so different after all. "He talked about you, you know," Sarah continued. "Every time I called, Jake's working the rigs in North Dakota. Jake sent money for the new tractor. Jake. I used to think he loved you more." "Funny. I always thought the same about you." We sat in the quiet kitchen, 2 middle-aged siblings trying to understand a father who'd never been good with words, who'd shown love through work and worry rather than hugs and praise. "What are you going to do with it?" I asked finally. "I don't know." I woke up on the couch in the living room, sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing. Sarah was already up, standing on the front porch with her phone pressed to her ear, probably dealing with some crisis in her real life. The house felt different in the morning light, smaller, shabbier, full of memories that seemed to echo off the walls. Dad's coffee cup still sat in the sink, unwashed. His reading glasses lay folded on the side table next to his chair, waiting for him to come back and finish the newspaper. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with adult eyes. The kitchen linoleum was cracked and faded. The wallpaper in the hallway, something Mom had picked out 30 years ago, was peeling at the corners. This wasn't the grand family estate I'd built up in my memory. It was an old house that needed work, on land that required constant attention and investment. Sarah came back inside, sliding her phone into her pocket. "That was my assistant. I've got depositions next week, 2 court dates, and a merger that's falling apart. Sounds important. It is, or it was. I don't know anymore. She looked around the kitchen like she was seeing it for the first time. How did Dad manage all this by himself? Barely. The last few years were hard on him. Drought, cattle prices, equipment breaking down. He was too proud to ask for help. You sent money. When I could. Wasn't enough, though. Never enough. Sarah walked to the window that looked out over the north pasture, where cattle grazed in the morning sun. I make more in a month than this place probably brings in all year. Money isn't everything, says the man who left for better pay. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd left for the same reason she had, because staying felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. There's something else, she said, something I found last night. Sarah led me to Dad's office, a cluttered room off the kitchen where he'd kept the ranch books and worried over cattle futures. She pulled out a manila folder from the bottom drawer of his desk. Financial records, she said, spreading papers across the desk. Jake, the ranch is in trouble, bad trouble. I looked at the numbers, my stomach sinking with each page. Outstanding loans, overdue payments, medical bills from Dad's last hospital stay that insurance hadn't covered. The ranch wasn't just struggling, it was drowning. How much? I asked. $200,000 in debt, maybe more. The bank's been patient because of Dad's history with them, but that patience won't last forever. I sank into Dad's chair, the same one where he'd taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12. He never said anything. Would you have? Would you have called your kids and told them you were failing? No, I wouldn't have. Dad was from a generation that handled their problems alone, that saw asking for help as weakness. He'd rather lose everything than admit he couldn't manage. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out another folder. He'd been talking to developers. 3 different companies made offers on the land in the past year. The offers were substantial, enough to pay off the debt and leave plenty left over, enough to set Sarah up for life, even by her standards. He never sold, I said. No, but look at this. She handed me a letter, Dad's handwriting shaky but determined. It was addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before he died. Jake, it read. I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I know I pushed too hard, expected too much. The ranch is in trouble, son. Bad trouble. I don't know if it can be saved, but if anyone could do it, it would be you. You have your mother's heart and your grandfather's stubbornness. Maybe that's enough. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. Why didn't he send this? I don't know. Maybe he was waiting for the right time. Maybe he was afraid you'd say no. I spent the rest of the morning walking the property, seeing it with new eyes. The fences that needed mending, the barn roof that was one bad storm away from collapse, the equipment that should have been replaced years ago. Dad had been holding it together with determination and prayer, but even that hadn't been enough. The cattle looked healthy at least. Dad had always prioritized the herd over everything else, including his own comfort. They grazed peacefully in the morning sun, unaware that their future hung in the balance. I found myself at the old oak tree where Grandpa Morrison had built a tire swing when I was 5. The rope was long gone, but the branch still bore the scars where it had hung. This tree had been here when the first Morrison claimed this land, had weathered droughts and floods and the slow march of time. What would Grandpa think of us now? His grandson ready to sell to developers, his great-grandson cut out of the will entirely, the family legacy reduced to debt and difficult decisions. My phone rang. Chuck, my foreman. Jake, I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation up here. The company's talking about layoffs, and your name came up. You being gone so long. How long do I have? Week, maybe 2. I'm sorry, brother. I tried to buy you more time. I hung up and stared at the house where 3 generations of my family had lived and died. In a week, I'd have to choose between a job that paid well but meant nothing to me and a ranch that meant everything but might be impossible to save. Sarah found me there an hour later, still staring at the house like it might give me answers. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what Dad really wanted." "I think Dad knew exactly what he was doing," Sarah said, settling beside me on the porch steps. "He gave me the ranch because he knew I had the money to save it. But he wrote that letter to you because he knew I didn't have the heart." I looked at her, seeing something in her expression I hadn't noticed before, a softness that reminded me of the sister who used to help me catch fireflies on summer evenings. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we both got exactly what we needed, just not in the way we expected." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. "I can transfer enough money to cover the immediate debts, but I can't run this place from Seattle, and I sure as hell can't move back here." "Sarah, let me finish. You know this land. You know the cattle, the neighbors, the way things work around here. I know contracts and negotiations and how to make money work for us instead of against us." I stared at her, not daring to hope. "You're talking about a partnership. I'm talking about saving Dad's legacy. Our legacy." She stood up, pacing the porch like she did when we were kids, and she was working through a problem. "We restructure the debt, modernize the operation, maybe diversify into agritourism or organic beef. There are markets for that now, especially if we can get certified." "You do that? Give up your law practice?" "Not give up. Scale back. Work remotely when I can. Come out here when I need to." She stopped pacing, looking out over the land that had shaped us both. "I'm tired, Jake. Tired of fighting other people's battles. Tired of living in a city where I don't know my neighbors' names. Maybe it's time to come home." I thought about the oil fields, the long hours and dangerous work, the money that never seemed to fill the empty places inside me. Then I thought about morning coffee on this porch, about cattle that knew my voice, about land that had been in our family for 70 years. "It won't be easy," I said. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." 3 months later, I was standing in the same spot where Dad had taught me to rope cattle, watching Sarah try to convince a particularly stubborn heifer to move toward the barn. She'd traded her designer suits for jeans and work boots, though she still looked like she was playing dress-up. "Jake!" she called, frustration clear in her voice. "This cow is broken!" I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in months. "She's not broken. She's just smarter than you are." The transformation hadn't been easy. Sarah had taken a leave of absence from her firm, something that had nearly given her partners heart attacks. I'd quit the oil fields, burning bridges I might need someday but couldn't bring myself to care about. The bank had been surprisingly willing to work with us once Sarah showed them her financial statements and our business plan. Turns out, having a successful lawyer as a partner opened doors that had been closed to a struggling rancher. We'd started small: organic certification, a website for direct-to-consumer sales, partnerships with local restaurants that wanted to source locally. Sarah handled the business side while I focused on the land and livestock. It was working, slowly but surely. "You know," Sarah said, finally getting the heifer moving in the right direction, "I never thought I'd say this, but I actually missed this place. Even the smell? Especially the smell." She grinned, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to follow me around the ranch, asking a million questions about everything. My phone buzzed with a text from our new ranch hand, a young guy from town who reminded me of myself at that age. Eager, hard-working, full of dreams about making something of himself. "The feed delivery's here," I told Sarah. "You want to help unload?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." She sighed dramatically, but followed me toward the barn, and I realized that for the first time since Dad's death, the future felt possible again. 1 year after the will reading, I stood in the same lawyer's office where my world had fallen apart. This time, though, I wasn't there to receive bad news. I was there to sign papers, making our partnership official, putting both our names on the deed. "Your father would be proud," Mr. Hendricks said, watching us sign the documents. He always said this land needed both of you, just in different ways. Sarah looked up from the papers. He said that? Many times. Said Jake had the heart for the work, but needed to learn there was no shame in accepting help. Said you had the mind for business, but needed to remember where you came from. Hendricks smiled. Stubborn man, your father. But he knew his children. Outside, the main street looked different than it had a year ago. New businesses were opening, young families moving back as remote work made rural living possible again. Our ranch was part of that change, employing local kids, buying from local suppliers, proving that small operations could compete if they were smart about it. You know what I realized? Sarah said as we walked to our trucks. Dad didn't cut you out of the will. He just made sure we'd have to work together to claim our inheritance. Think he planned it that way? I think Dad was smarter than either of us gave him credit for. I looked back at the ranch as we drove home, cattle grazing in pastures that were green again after a good spring rain. The house had a fresh coat of paint, the barn roof was solid, and the fences were straight and strong. More importantly, it felt alive again, full of purpose and possibility. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I thought about Dad's letter, the one that had started this whole journey. He'd been right about one thing. It had taken both heart and stubbornness to save this place. But he'd been wrong about something too. I hadn't done it alone. And maybe that was the real lesson he'd been trying to teach us all along.